Hello everyone, welcome back to RotoViz Overtime on RotoViz Radio, brought to you by Blue Wire. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland, and I am joined once again by Shawn Siegele, one of the co-owners of RotoViz, co-host, of course, of RotoViz Overtime, and co-host as well of the Stealing Bananas podcast with Ben Gretsch. Those guys done a couple of fun drafts. If you want to head over and check those out over on Stealing Bananas in the Underdog Fantasy. Shawn, I believe I get all these names mixed up. Was it the Redemption, the Resurrection? Which draft are we in here?
Resurrection.
Yeah, there's so I love all the different names that come out. Even we have the Pomeranian, the puppy. We have all the different options, but it can become quite tricky to remember them all when it gets to the stage of the season. Draft season doesn't stop. You have your chances with Underdog over there to get involved in those. Shawn, we are doing a little bit of a running back theme over the last couple of shows where we've looked at different options at the running back positions. But today what we're going to do is look ahead. Unfortunately, we have the injury with Rachaad Penny, which means that he's going to miss the rest of the season. We are going to talk a specific question that came in about his running back teammate in Kenneth Walker. We're going to talk about that, but we're also going to do it with trying to find who this year's Devin Singletary or Rachaad Penny could be, the guy who is in your roster who maybe isn't having the impact right now, but over the next 12 weeks has a monster impact for your team from a fantasy football perspective. So, Shawn, before we get into that, how are you feeling here as we get ready for NFL Week 6?
Good. It's going to be a big week. I think had a lot of fun on waivers yesterday. Added a lot of new players to teams. The teams are looking good as we head into the bye weeks. There have been a lot of injuries early. That part is always really frustrating. We don't care for it, and yet it does set up for those deep teams to really thrive. I think that until we get to the bye weeks and we see how teams can deal with the chaos and the replacement players, then you're not really seeing the true strength of teams. This will be fun. So I'm looking forward to it. Even with some of the frustrating elements and so many NFL teams not playing the type of offense, not scoring the level of points that we would like, it's been a very fun 2022 season.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. On that, Shawn, the bye weeks, it is always that part I mentioned. Usually the bye weeks would have started previously a little bit earlier. We have week 6 here with our bye weeks. It's this point when you go from like week 6 through week 7, 8, 9, and you start to see the week where you pull up your team and you're like, half my team's on bye this week. They're the teams where you start to see how the depth is for those rosters. So it's important to be circulating on the waiver wire to make sure you're looking a couple of weeks ahead from that perspective as well. Going to put you on the spot, Shawn. Who was your favorite waiver wire pickup of the week on any team that you have? Any particular favorite player, even if it was only one share that you picked up this week?
Well, we added some Taysom Hill, and I think that's a fun play. The most likely scenario here is that we go back to getting no points from him. The second most likely scenario is that you play him this week and he doesn't score. You play him the next week and he doesn't score. You bench him in 3 weeks and he scores 30. And then you play him in the following week and he doesn't score. It's going to be tricky, right? But in discussing this with a number of co-managers, it's a fun play. There haven't been a lot of meaningful waiver wire additions this year. And you almost think back a little bit too, and there are a lot of apples and oranges elements to this comparison, but when Michael Vick comes out with the Philadelphia Eagles, really changes the fantasy landscape that year at quarterback. Obviously, that's a redemption story for him playing there for Andy Reid. I don't think that Taysom Hill is going to be the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, there were some very fluky elements to his performance last week. We've seen before and we've heard before that he's going to be involved. But, I mean, there are some similarities, too, to the situation with Cordarrelle Patterson, right, where you watch him for basically a decade and never does anything. If you don't go after him when he flashes to start last season, then you're sitting there without those points for the whole year in a situation where it could make a big difference. I mean, Cordarrelle Patterson, the perfect 0 RB back. If you added him in free agency, you essentially have a free RB1 for the entire season. In most cases, it doesn't happen. But, I mean, you can almost think of the cry wolf situation where it's, nothing there, nothing there, nothing there. But if at the very end there actually is a wolf, then you win. And so I think it's a fun way too to hedge against some bets where if you're playing a lot of underdog and you know that Taysom Hill is drafted in the 17th, 18th round and a lot of those, and you're thinking, well, worst case scenario, if he blows up and those teams slingshot ahead of me, or now I'm competing with a team that is going to put that type of scoring into the tight end position when tight end scoring outside of Travis Kelce, outside of Mark Andrews is so difficult to come by. Now you have that possibility of having Hill on your main event rosters or your home league rosters, whatever league that you're playing that you care about the most. Suddenly you have that potential trump card, even though probably it's worthless or actually flat out counterproductive because you end up playing mostly zeros at that spot. But I think for a couple of weeks after what we watched in week 5, and it isn't the first time this season he's had a big game, but as the Saints continue to evolve and see what they have with Jameis Winston, see what they have with Andy Dalton, I mean, you do have a unique weapon here. At some point, a team, and specifically the New Orleans Saints, that's the roster he's on, could deploy that effectively. I think you have to be in a little bit, especially with how dry the tight end position is, and especially when the 2022 season has not provided a lot of waiver options. Now, it still might in the future. One of the things that we're going to talk about on this show, where are those rest of season league-winning running backs going to come from? In deep leagues, these guys are going to be stashed, and so it's a matter of trading for them or waiting for them to be cut. I mean, we're going to still see some pretty interesting players cut over the next 6 weeks because fantasy managers are dealing with those bye weeks, and you may have someone you've been stashing, but suddenly you get to the point where you have a bunch of injuries and a bunch of guys on buys. You only have a certain number of roster spots. You may have to cut a stash in order to not take a zero. And then someone else, or, if it's one of your competitors, you pounce. So that's what we're looking for. It doesn't mean that we won't have some big plays, but especially if you are kind of in that middle area, especially if you've taken some low QB scores because of the Trey Lance situation, especially if you had Kyle Pitts and then Gerald Everett is your backup. He fills in last week because Pitts is out, and that unfortunately is very poorly timed in terms of Everett posting more or less a zero there. You could be in a situation where you're chasing. If Pitts continues to have some of these issues and the Falcons kind of go away and they end up stashing him for 2023, then again, you want to have options. Even if you have Kyle Pitts as one of your early selections, if you built an OT style team, you should have enough depth and enough firepower to really make your move over the next 6 weeks with or without Pitts. And so those are all the things that we're kind of looking at here in terms of how do we want to attack? Do we want to be aggressive? It's a short season. And so you can only wait so long before you try and really make your move. Again, I don't expect that to pan out, but when you're talking about your 20th roster spot, I mean, you want to have that upside. Taysom Hill, very exciting player. I think it makes more sense to stash a player like that than to stash a wide receiver who just had his biggest game of the season and doesn't have a profile that you could really legitimately ever start him, than to stash the third string running back from a team that doesn't score points. And those are some of the other types of options that you have for that 20th roster spot.
Yeah, so that was a fun bit of a digression that we had there. You mentioned, though, it could be worthless. Something about the waiver wire, Shawn. It can always be worthless, but it could also be priceless. So if you go and you end up getting Taysom Hill and he becomes something like we seen with Cardell Patterson last year, it wins your league. You can't really put a price on that, and that'll be well spent waiver budget. I did see in the waiver wire report this week, some teams really went after Taysom Hill. There was some full bankrolls kind of spent on him. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. And keep your ear to the ground. There could be some of the players we talk about here who aren't available in your league at the moment, or it could be your dynasty league you're trying to acquire them. But they may become available, as Shawn mentions, as we go through this bye-week process and try and keep those rosters loaded. But the first question that did come in that kind of prompted this idea in my head was from John O'Hartles, who listens in regularly, sends us in some great questions throughout the preseason, sent one in terms of the unfortunate injury to Rashaad Penny, but he said he would love to hear our thoughts on Ken Walker moving forward for Dynasty and his perspective. But this here all ties in because we're looking rest of the season. If he has a great finish of the season, his Dynasty value is going to move up and so on and so forth. So we talked a lot about Kenneth Walker and Rachaad Penny in the preseason, Shawn. Like both of them, we were hoping that it would be a healthy season and we would see what we've seen from Rachaad Penny last season at the end of it to start this year. We kind of were seeing that for the majority of it. And then unfortunately, the injury he has picked up. But we also talked about Kenneth Walker a lot in the conversation with Breece Hall and how both of these guys looked in college, how we had high expectations for them coming into the league. Seattle probably wasn't our favorite landing spot for Walker because we like Rachaad Penny. But now that he's in Seattle and what has occurred, this is a pretty prime spot for Kenneth Walker, especially with how this offense is starting to play now. They're opening things up a little bit more with Geno Smith, and then Kenneth Walker's obviously coming in to be the, in my opinion, the clear RB1 here now moving forward for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and so this question too kind of deals with the Javonte Williams injury. Folks who had Williams, Ben and I on our Dynasty team in the RotoViz Triflex format that is doing quite well, had 3 running backs that we were focusing on. Saquon Barkley obviously has been the star of the 2022 season. And then Damian Harris and Rachaad Penny, 2 guys that you can mix and match and get some pretty significant production out of. They both go down. And because of the way some of these dynasty leagues are structured, we're not necessarily stashing as many running backs there. And so now it's the question of, will any of our league mates work with us to help us address that RB2 slot? Are we willing to work with them? Are we willing to pay a fair price to get a running back and try to keep competing? So it's tricky for both Javonte Williams and for Kenneth Walker as you get these players moving now in opposite direction. Javonte, because of this injury, is probably someone you can't even trade for a 2023 first-round pick at this juncture based on the way the 2023 class is thought of. So many elite profiles in that class that dynasty managers would prefer to have that pick as opposed to a back, even a back like Williams, who's looked very, very good, but now will be coming off of an injury. The flip side of that is Ken Walker. How much does it cost to get him? I moved him to tier 3 in the dynasty rankings in this week's update, which means a first-round pick and a second-round pick, the approximate price there. I think that you want to start by offering a 2023 first, especially if the opposing manager is in a rebuild, right? You're not going to be able to get that for Walker for anyone who's competing, but it may be that rebuilding teams actually still would prefer to get a 2023 first-round pick with the level of player that you can potentially get in that draft. You work with them, throw in some peripheral pieces, try and get Walker back, see what he jumps to. Now, it's going to be difficult because you know that there's value in having the player right now, and the opposing manager may not be willing to give that up. In most cases, Walker was very expensive, and so it's going to be difficult to buy someone who went usually between the 102 and the 105, but very frequently the 102 or the 103 for a pick in the 2023 draft when managers don't know what that is. But especially in Superflex, with the volume of quarterbacks, with the volume of elite running backs, there may be a lot of picks in next year's draft that are seen to be equivalent to or even better than Walker, even now that Walker is in this decent situation. The thing that has really changed here relative to the preseason, and one of the reasons why Walker actually looked overvalued in the preseason, but now the Seattle Seahawks have answered this question about their offense. Geno Smith has been absolutely fantastic. I wrote on Monday about the way that Tyler Lockett is having one of his best seasons, and so much of what we thought was Russell Wilson with Tyler Lockett is actually just Tyler Lockett. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Geno Smith is some superstar. DK Metcalf, Lockett, both very, very good players. But the fact that this offense is humming along and in many ways looks better than it looked under Russell Wilson, that's very positive for the running backs. Now, there are some potential flies in the ointment here when you look at the future schedule for Seattle. And we know that at the running back position, if you're going to run up against this wall of elite rush defenses, it just is a very, very different dynamic than when you hit a string of teams where they're allowing 5 yards per carry, where they're allowing a lot of carries based on how they play offense on their side of the ball, the game context, the game environment, that type of thing. One of the biggest dynasty trades that we advocated for was a couple of years ago with David Montgomery, when he basically had started his career off and had gone through this extremely long stretch where he had been so bad that even in dynasty people were giving up on him. He was being cut in redraft, but he was about to go on this dream stretch of matchups, and he was able to actually parlay that into, well, resurrection is the theme today with the show. So he rises from the dead and now is a very big part of the fantasy landscape. When you look at the Seattle Seahawks in the RotoViz Strength of Schedule streamer, you see that they rank 31st in remaining schedule, and the only team worse is the New Orleans Saints that we were just discussing. Then that's a little bit of a red flag for you. That's not necessarily what you want to see. It is an element too where a very large number of fantasy managers are more or less schedule agnostic and are not going to look at that when they're thinking about offseason values and say, look, I mean, Walker had this brutal schedule that he was dealing with. We're going to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. So if he has a down stretch or multiple games of poor performance, that's going to impact his trade value as well. So you want to really make sure that you go out and attack him, trying to get him onto your roster, but it is important to be aware of price, to be aware of how that 2023 class is being perceived. With Walker, you have a guy who's 211 pounds, runs a 4.38 40. You have a chance for him to be a faster DeAndre Swift or a bigger Jamal Charles. He's somebody who comes in with a running back prospect lore that was very similar to Le'Veon Bell. His breakaway rush score similar to that of Travis Etienne. Obviously, it doesn't mean that he'll be any of those players I just mentioned, but you can dream about him a little, and when he breaks off that long touchdown run more or less immediately once he gets the role, it's just a reminder of what he can do. It's also something that will influence his price. And so you're going to have to pay for that long run, even though you don't get the benefit of it. Positives and negatives for Walker going forward, but a very exciting player.
So Shawn, looking into some other teams then that may be able to carve the way. So it looks like Walker is already, due to injury, being able to get into that RB1 role, which is going to open up those additional opportunities for him. Some of the backfields that I've singled out, and I want to let you pick which one you want to discuss first, or which ones we start to focus on. I have the Dallas Cowboys. That would obviously be Tony Pollard, Planton, Ezekiel Elliott. It feels like the Cowboys will never want that to ever happen, but at this point, it looks pretty obvious that Pollard is running much better, playing much better than Elliott at the moment for the Dallas Cowboys. We have Arizona, which James Conner's dealing with some injuries over the last couple of weeks, but Eno Benjamin has looked quite good in his opportunities that he's got. We have the Miami Dolphins. Raheem Mostert continues to branch his way into more touches, more carries for the Miami Dolphins, even with the quarterback issues that they are having at the moment. The Jacksonville Jaguars, James Robinson started the season, obviously looks good, really good story back from the injury. Travis Etienne has looked extremely good and extremely efficient over the last couple of weeks, continues to look like he's getting back to his explosive self that we had before the injury. Then we have the Ravens, which, no surprise, J.K. Dobbins is probably in here. Nobody's going to really be able to get him off a waiver wire anywhere, I would imagine. But in Dynasty might be somebody that you're able to look and approach if an owner maybe is a little bit frustrated as he continues to work his way back into that full-time role. I do have in the Bengals and the Chiefs as honorary mentions, and then some players that I think that are in the mix. I think Rachaad White is in the mix, but I think it does take a Leonard Fournette injury for that to happen. Stevenson with the Patriots already has an injury to Harris. He fits the mold quite well to slot into that. And then Brian Robinson back from his recent off-the-field injury and the issues that occurred from that, but back very quick, looked pretty good. But Shawn, out of those backfields, which do you want to start with as maybe the prime option here that could be the true breakout superstar down the stretch of the running back position?
Well, I think we have to look at the combination of performance to price. And Eno Benjamin was one of our favorites. He did get more expensive at the very, very end, but someone who, if he performs well because of how cheap he was, then it makes a huge difference for you. That's a contrast to players like Pollard and Etienne and Dobbins, who were much more expensive. Now, that doesn't mean they couldn't be league winners for you. They definitely can be. But Benjamin is interesting there. He's averaging 2.5 yards after the carry. That is a positive sign for him. He had a few plays in week 5 where he seemed, I wouldn't say confused, but lacked aggressiveness or a sense maybe of where he really wanted to go as he took the handoff. There in the backfield struggled a little bit, but once he got to the second level, you see both the cutting ability and the ability to get back to full speed. Someone who has an athletic profile very similar to Aaron Jones. And we know that Jones, one of the most explosive backs in the NFL. Now, Jones in some ways outperforms some of his metrics, but when you look at the elite agility, the elite explosiveness, maybe not the long speed, but that short area explosiveness is so important for a running back and does help you when you get to the second level. That type of explosion was very evident in his touchdown run in the last game. The other element here, Darrell Williams a little bit dinged up as well. We don't know how long that will necessarily last, but it gives Benjamin potentially here a little bit of a window to really seize so many of the important carries. Not necessarily like fully seize the backup work, not necessarily fully seize the starting job. It's going to be a little bit nebulous there. They've said, look, James Conner knows the offense, a great veteran. He can play even if he can't practice very much. So we don't know what the split is going to be in the short term, but Benjamin is going to get an opportunity here. The Arizona Cardinals, after a pretty weak first 2 or 3 games, starting to look better. Week 5, even though they lose to the Philadelphia Eagles, a lot of promising signs there. Marquise Brown has been, I think, everything that the Cardinals could have asked for. He's one of the elite fantasy wide receivers so far. Rondale Moore finally showing the explosiveness. Again, that short area quickness with someone who also has 4.2 speed. So he's not just a short area quickness guy. I mean, he can take it to the house if you get that opening. Yeah, it's frustrating to see him mostly get the ball underneath and then have to beat a lot of guys to make that play. But his athleticism really stood out, and they're not that far away from getting DeAndre Hopkins back. The Cardinals are about to transition into being one of the most electric, exciting offenses in the NFL. And that's relevant as it sort of washes back on the running back position, because in the last 2 years, the Cardinals have been number 2 overall, trailing only the Indianapolis Colts with Jonathan Taylor, number 2 overall in carries from the 5-yard line or closer. The back in this offense, based on how successful the Cardinals offense is and their play calling down close by the end zone, I mean, this is a team that can create a lot of running back points if things fall the right way. Eno Benjamin now, someone who, I mean, there's that glimmer of the thesis that we had preseason. It doesn't mean that it's going to pan out, but you can't help but be excited about what you're seeing.
Yeah, you have to be excited. And, we don't want injuries. And Connor was certainly our guy last year, Shawn. And in Dynasty, I still have him on a lot of rosters. Just, we don't want to see him get injured, but you have to look at what happens at the running back position. And you mentioned the key point there, and that was the thesis on the James Conner play last year, was how good we expect the offense to be, how much they get into the red zone, how much they get inside the 10-yard line, and then those opportunities opening up to the running back. So Eno Benjamin is somebody who we've been on that train for a long time, Shawn, but maybe it's starting to really take off here. You mentioned the key point as well of the value of where you would have had to draft these players previously, or where you would have been maybe able to acquire them in Dynasty for that value. The next one would probably fit the mold on that list would be Miami Dolphins and Raheem Mostert, because he is somebody who was going at the start of the process a lot later in drafts, started to really move up in the last couple of weeks in terms of where he was being drafted, but he has looked good as well. The other one, I suppose I could pair into that, who was going in the same range originally, but then Zachary Kruger single-handedly moved his ADP up, was Brian Robson of the Washington Commanders. But Mostert, Shawn, I give the credit to you. He was certainly one of your key guys as we entered the draft season, and he continued to move up draft boards. And the season is probably playing out as well for him through these opening weeks as it could have. I'd say if he had a cut, or if he had got some of those short yardage rushing touchdowns that that went to his running back partners.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any credit to be had yet. We'll see what Mostert does going forward. He is on the injury report with a little bit of a knee injury this week. By the time this show is out, we may have more information that maybe he's dealing with something more significant. Maybe it's just one of those nicks that they list on the injury report. With Mostert, you're always very concerned about even minor injuries because the knees have been really the thing that's kept him from emerging as a star, not necessarily as a Jamal Charles, but when you're talking about one of the fastest players in the NFL who's perfect for this style of offense, if you go follow what people are writing about the Dolphins this week, there's so much enthusiasm about this sort of stretch zone and the way that Mostert is a fit for it and the way that the Dolphins, even with the struggles they're having at the quarterback position, are finally getting that running game going. One of the things that you see there with Mostert is that he's averaging 2.6 yards before contact. Again, before contact yards, also an element that in many ways are an attribute of the running back. Now, there are lots of other things that go into that. Contextually, you prefer to have an elite offensive line that helps by a huge extent the types of plays that you're being given the ball on. Obviously, if you're facing a lot of third and long draw play defenses versus goal line defenses, it's going to influence how many yards you can generate there. But Mostert carrying a lot between the 20s, third in this stat. He's a perfect fit for what they want to do. He's able to execute this offense and break the big plays by slicing through the line untouched and then having the speed to go the distance. He looked very, very good in week 5, even though they couldn't get anything else going. That's not necessarily going to be the case every week, but when you consider that the Dolphins have the number 5 remaining schedule, you can dream a little bit there because Raheem Mostert could be a guy who starts to reel off a string of 100-yard games, gets in the end zone. Suddenly you have a guy who's really even on the RB1, RB2 border. Pushing up above that would probably take not just performance by him, but also either injuries or pretty significant underperformance by some of the guys ahead of him. But he can get to that cusp without anything dramatically changing if he can build on the week 5 performance. I mean, Chase Edmonds is going to figure into this backfield. It's not going to just be Mostert. You wouldn't want it to be just Mostert. He doesn't have the body to hold up to that kind of workload. But he's an exciting guy. Anytime that you have someone with speed, it takes only 1 or 2 plays to really change the game. If you can't pay for the massive workload, and to pay for the massive workload, you're talking about prices in the first 3 rounds. Outside of that, you want guys who could move into a better workload and just don't need that many touches to score points. Mostert is that guy.
And then speaking of kind of the players that there would have been more capital invested into at the start of this season in terms of expectations, 2 of those guys coming back off injuries. I mentioned earlier Etienne and how he is building himself up. We obviously didn't have J.K. Dobbins for the first, I believe it was 3 weeks of the season. We've had him then since that. And then we obviously have Tony Pollard, who is a little bit less expensive, but was still going in those opening 10 rounds. I've been very impressed with Pollard, particularly in a situation where they're also missing Dak Prescott up to this point for the majority of the season. Out of those 3 guys, is there one in particular you want to share the spotlight on?
Well, we can run through all 3 of them. 4.5
and I do have good
contact.
news for you as well. Mostert did return to training today, so that's positive.
Yeah, just don't list the knee, right? Don't list the knee. Just say rest. All of my guys who are actually injured, I just want the tag to say rest. It'll make you feel better for the 24, 48 hours until you find out that they're going to also be resting on Sunday. Tony Pollard, 4.5 yards after contact because he's broken some huge plays. 25% evasion rate puts him up near the very top, the number 6 remaining schedule. You're thinking, well, that's an obvious league winner. The problem is he just doesn't play, right? The Dallas Cowboys don't have a receiving touch to the backs in week 5. Pollard has the big game, but he only has 4.2 expected points. But imagine how good you have to be on a consistent basis to take a 4-point workload and turn it into fantasy double figures. Ezekiel Elliott continues to underperform. This offense is going to be better. It's going to be more explosive when Dak Prescott gets back. They're going to need to score some more points. You can't rely on that elite defense every week. We may see that start even this weekend when they play the Philadelphia Eagles. So, I mean, there are going to be more total points in this offense, and yet probably not enough to make it really go around. If the Cowboys don't take the step at any point of fully de-emphasizing Ezekiel Elliott, it's going to be hard for Pollard to do his thing. You mentioned Etienne. His is just so exciting. I thought he looked like one of the most explosive backs in the preseason games. It wasn't always translating into production. It didn't always translate into production early in the season. But with the big plays that he ripped off over and over in week 5, and he was really the only sort of sliver of sunlight for the Jaguars in a very depressing loss to the Texans. But over and over, he was able to get into the secondary. And then that burst that he has, one of the reasons why he was such a dynamic and record-setting college player. Now you play on one of the best college teams, you know that you're going to be dealing with a lot of space, but he was able to take advantage of that. He's got an 18% evasion rate. He's got the number 5 fantasy playoff schedule. The overall schedule, not the best, but especially anytime he has a down game, you try and make some moves for him in redraft. You see if you can buy him in Dynasty. I haven't been selling Etienne even when I've gotten good offers. The offers I've made for Etienne have been pretty much routinely rejected. So at least in my leagues, no one else is selling Etienne either. There could be some points this season where the Jaguars generate enough sort of total frustration for everyone that their players do get less expensive. But he's the guy who's really exciting. And then J.K. Dobbins, especially considering it was a close game. It was frustrating that he played so little against the Bengals. That raises some red flags. It's obviously on a tiny sample, but he does have a 25% evasion rate. That's number 7 among backs who have at least 25 touches. I mean, he's looked good, right? The limited number of touches have not been a result of him not making plays. He's got one of the best forced missed tackle rates in the NFL because very few people can cut and then accelerate like he can. He was an elite prospect. He looks like he still has that. I mean, is he 100%? I mean, probably not, but he can do things at 85% that the vast majority of the other backs can't do at 100, which is one of the reasons that we have some excitement for him. If he continues to play the number of snaps he's playing, then it'll end up being pretty depressing. And that may be what happens. We don't have a clear read on it. The championship game matchup for Dobbins is not great, but if you have some running back depth, I mean, he's an interesting guy to get you through the early rounds of the fantasy playoffs. And you can't win the title if you don't win the quarters, you don't win the semis. He's got the number 6 schedule in those 2 games combined. I mean, we've got the candle still burning for him, so we'll see what he does.
And then the last couple of questions as we get ready to see this one out, Shawn, is any of the teams or any players that we haven't touched on or haven't named that could potentially fit into that category that you kind of have half an eye on as this could be a player who does that down the stretch?
Well, the 2, or we could say 3, I guess, handcuff names that are really interesting because they seem such good fits for what the offense does. And the offense seems like it could really support the backup. You look at what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are currently doing for Leonard Fournette, and that's despite the fact that they're giving some work to Rachaad White. If anything would happen to Fournette, then, I mean, White instantly goes again to the RB1, RB2 border. The workload combined with his specific profile where he's a pretty good receiving back, and you have to be that to fit into what they want to do in Tampa. And then he's got the speed. I mean, those are all the elements you're looking for someone who becomes not just a league winner, but a tournament winner. The Cincinnati Bengals continue to create huge RB EP numbers, despite Joe Mixon being a below average starter. The difference in talent between Mixon and Pirine, probably more or less nothing. Pirine would jump into a hugely valuable workload with a Mixon injury. And then the same thing in Las Vegas. I don't think that you can say that Josh Jacobs and Zamir White are the same caliber of player by any stretch. We don't know what White is. And Josh Jacobs, one of the real breakout players of 2022, or if we want to say maybe one of the best post-hype stories in a long time. You look at his peripherals, you check out the work by Corbin Young on the site there, you're going to notice that Jacobs is blowing everybody away. You just look at the fantasy box score and you can see how well he's performed. His EP numbers, I think number 3 in terms of average, and he's outperforming them. And those numbers are more sustainable. So he's having a fantastic year. Zamir White, though, someone who, I mean, his testing numbers at the combine were indicative of someone who may be all the way back from the collegiate injuries. He came into college as this unbelievable prospect. He and James Cook obviously split time there, but both of them maybe more exciting than their raw numbers indicate. We did get the touchdown run from Cook in garbage time in the Buffalo game. The fact that the offense has been more favorable for a one-back situation than maybe we had expected. I mean, Zamir White is going to be someone who gets cut in a lot of leagues. We talked about what's going to happen during the bye week. Zamir White pops up as available in one league or another almost every week in these different leagues that I'm playing. You try and figure out how you can get him onto your roster and keep stashing him. He's going to get cut because he's going to go put up a lot of zeros in the short term. But if anything were to happen to Josh Jacobs, then suddenly, again, you've got a potential league winner. In all of these individual situations, obviously we're hoping for the backs to stay healthy. But when you're looking at stashes and when you're looking at how can you win your fantasy league and what the upside would be, those are the guys that I prefer to have there, as opposed to players who maybe have a little bit of standalone value, but I mean, the chances they could actually do anything for you, even if some of the other players in the committee got hurt. If you have a 4-back situation in a frustrating offense and maybe 2 guys are currently out, the guy you are playing has some standalone value, but is the second stringer, and then players are coming back. I mean, one of the backfields I'm thinking of a little bit there would be the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the Falcons have run the ball successfully in any individual game. The running backs could have some value, but there is so much flux. The offense itself is not very good. And I mean, you're just going to have all of these moving parts kind of swirling around throughout. Even if you hit on somebody for a week, it doesn't look like he's going to be in position to sustain that value. So those are some of the contrasts that you're dealing with. And some of the backfields, they don't actually run the ball well and have even that going for them. In those cases, unless you are absolutely desperate, when we talk about roster management, and this is a little bit part of what Ben and I talked about last week on our waiver wire show, where we're talking about the tactics of bidding and the tactics of roster construction. The roster construction element is as important or more important than the bidding element in terms of thinking like why you would want to have these guys on your roster in the first place and how do you have to manage that as you go through the bye weeks. Now, you don't want to take zeros, and a lot of listeners will be playing in 16 roster spot leagues. That's both good and bad. Now, you can say to yourself, well, I can't stash these guys because I don't have the roster spots. And especially as I go through the bye weeks and I have injuries, I'm trying to play people. But the flip side of that, too, is that in shallower leagues, the waiver wire is a much better source of wealth going forward. So you're much less likely to get completely locked out if you want to stash a high profile or a high upside player, as opposed to continuing to kind of roster these guys who maybe get you a few points. So you want to remember, too, that if you're in a shallower league, you can actually make viable replacements going into that week, where in deeper leagues, you actually have to be very proactive in looking forward, balancing those types of issues.
Yeah, and that was a good point you mentioned the show. I would recommend for anyone who hasn't heard it, even if you have heard it, I would go back and listen to it. That was one that I actually listened to again a second time on the flight to London, Shawn, last week, because just so much good information. And you want to be able to soak all that in. And sometimes when Shawn and Ben are at it in the lab, you need to take it in a few times to make sure it sinks in fully. The other thing I want to mention is thanks to Jono for sending in that question. We get a lot of great questions from the OT community, and with those questions coming in, sometimes it primes ideas for our shows, and that's been the case over the recent weeks again of the season. So thanks to everyone who is sending in those questions. We are ready for NFL Week 6. If you want to get ready for it with a RotoViz NFL Pass, you can do so, and you can also save yourself 10% with the promo code RVRadio2022 at checkout. That will save you 10% off a RotoViz NFL Pass. It'll get you access to all of the content and all of the tools up on rotoviz.com to be able to help set up. Even Shawn talked about it today with some of the strength of schedules that are moving forward. All that is available up on the website through the tools on rotoviz.com. With that said, though, all is really is left to say is good luck to everyone in NFL Week 6. We will be back with the recap show, which will come out early Monday, 5 a.m. Eastern posting time on the podcast feed. Comes out a little bit later on the day on the video side. Make sure you are subscribed to RotoViz Overtime to get that as soon as it is available. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com, and including the piece we started off talking about today with Rachaad Penny, which will be linked in today's show notes. Until we are back on Monday with the recap show, have a good one.